Just one second. All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Caucus for Women in Statistics. We're having a webinar today where Nancy Keller tells her story. We appreciate all of you for joining us. Let's see if I can change the slide. Oh, we just had a quick thing about the Caucus for Women in Statistics and is an international professional statistical society formed in 1971 for the education, employment, and advancement of women in statistics and data science. And its membership is open to anyone who supports our mission. So our vision is a world where women in the profession of statistics and data science have equal opportunity and access to influence policies and decisions in workplaces, governments, and communities. And our mission is to advance the careers of women. Our website and email is below. Let me see. Sorry, I tried to mute somebody. Just so you know, we have our membership. Students are free. Developing countries is $10. First year members is $10, and continuing members are $30. We have a lot going on and are planning more programming to come. On October 8th, we're going to have our third annual International Day for Women in Statistics and Data Science. Registration and session submission is open. In May, we're going to have an online craft social where we're going to make, I think, a bag out of a t-shirt. So Cynthia's going to lead that. Something new to do. And then today we have Nancy Keller, former ASA president and one of the founding members of the caucus, director of the Office of Biostatistics Research at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute of NIH. She's going to share the story of her career. Her story is evolving and offers great perspective, especially to early career members. We are looking forward to hearing you. I will.
Okay.
All right.
I should. Okay. Oh, can you see the top of the slide?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Good. The title I've given this is "What Will I Be When I Grow Up?" Evolving as a statistician. I guess I've grown up, but this is the history. There must be a next slide button. Slide control. I know there's a next slide. Oh, there it is. Hey. Okay, so this is about my personal and professional journey. And once I figure out how to use Zoom, I think we'll be just fine. And how I got to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute and the pitfalls and opportunities along the way. And I'll end with some conclusions. So, ancient history. See it, there it is. I grew up in New York City, and that's both advantageous and disadvantageous, because it's advantageous because it prepares you to react to multiple stimuli, sometimes reacting to simultaneous stimuli, and for the give and take of life. On the other hand, people from other parts of the country think you're very aggressive and may not appreciate your sense of humor. I graduated from the City College of New York, and that was in the last century. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics with a minor in education. And that's because I was planning to be a high school teacher, a high school math teacher. And I actually had a job as a high school math teacher. I never heard of the term biostatistics until the first half of my senior year in college, when I had coffee with my geology professor, and he asked me if I ever heard of biostatistics. And I said, "Oh, what's that?" Okay, so this is where I came from. This is one of my favorite New Yorker covers. This is a New Yorker's view of the universe. The Hudson River, I used to walk to the Hudson River all the time. Then there's this place across the Hudson River called Jersey. There's a city called Chicago. There's Las Vegas. And there's this Pacific Ocean all the way at the other side. And that's all you know. You don't really know anything about the rest of the world. In particular, this is, quote, downtown, unquote, or midtown. And I come from a place called Inwood, which is at the upper tip of Manhattan. And City College, my zip code was actually 10040. And City College was down down lower in Manhattan, but not on this map either. So my world was somewhat narrow. Okay, so why did I go to graduate school in Cleveland? Well, this is the first pitfall. When I was in college, in my sophomore year, I had chemistry lab, and there was this guy across the lab from me, and his name was Herb Geller. And in due course, we became a couple of years later, in fact. And so the first pitfall is the two-body problem, because once you become a couple, you'd like to be able to live together. That means getting two jobs in the same place, or one of you giving up. Neither of us was of the type to give up. And interestingly enough, Herb was most encouraging that I shouldn't give up. The second pitfall in graduate school, actually, let me tell you why we got to Cleveland. Herb said to me, you're too smart to be a high school teacher. Come to graduate school with me. So being very agreeable, and of course, socialized as a woman, I said, okay, where are you applying? And I applied to the same place as he did. And the two of us got fellowships at Case Western Reserve University, allegedly independently of one another. It was easy to get fellowships back then. So then the second pitfall was in my second year of graduate work at Case, I took prelims. And just let me say, if you pass prelims the first time, you don't need a plan B. Okay, so here's the beginning of the trajectory. We went from New York to Cleveland, and then to Rochester, New York. The reason we went to Rochester was that Herb did a postdoc there. And I was not finished with my dissertation, and I commuted back to Cleveland to meet with my thesis advisor. So I was an instructor at the University of Rochester for 2 years, and I finished my thesis while teaching at the U of R. And I'm one of those people whose thesis advisor did not have the solution to my problem in his desk drawer. We were a very odd combination in terms of personality match. Nancy is not shy and introverted. Lajos Takács was Hungarian and very shy and introverted. And what he taught me was how to ask questions, not necessarily questions that could be answered, but he taught me how to ask questions. But what happened to me at the U of R, well, before I got to the U of R, I was in Cleveland for 5 years. Herb finished his dissertation in 5 years. And I was still not done after 5 years. And of course, I wanted to drop out. I applied for secondary high school teaching jobs in Rochester, and I got a letter from one of them, and Herb saw it and he blew his stack and said, "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" So, and I'm there sort of saying, can I do it? Can I really do it? Should I keep trying? And this is interesting because it's an example of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is a sensation that you don't belong, that we all get hit with sometime in our lives. Sometimes we get hit with it many times in our life. Sometimes we have a lifetime battle with imposter syndrome. So 5 years in Cleveland and still not done. And there's this yelling in my head. What the hell are you doing? Can you do it? Can you really do it? Are you smart enough? Well, okay. So writing a thesis is agony. Those of you who are still at that point, or those of you who remember back, I'm sure you'll agree, it's agony. And I don't consider my thesis advisor to be a mentor, but my first mentor was Jack Hall, who was chair of the statistics department at the University of Rochester. He really saved my academic life. He really helped me write a thesis. At the same time, and I've never said this aloud, I've never admitted this, I've never put it on my CV, he paid me as a part-time instructor And I taught the same load as the men who were paid full time. So then we continue with the geographic constraints, because 5 years in Cleveland, 2 years in Rochester, and I did get my PhD. Herb finished his postdoc and very quickly got a job at Rutgers University Medical School, as it was then known. So what I did is I took a map, and it was, before we had computer maps, before we had computer maps, but we didn't have iPhones or Waze. I took a map and drew a 60-mile radius around Rutgers University and applied for jobs within that 60-mile radius. So I ended up with a job in Philly in the statistics department of the University of Pennsylvania, which is in the Wharton School. So I was an assistant professor of statistics at the Wharton School. So here's the trajectory again. It's from New York to Cleveland to Rochester to Philadelphia. Okay. And I kept thinking, I didn't belong at the Wharton School. I have absolutely no interest in business. When it comes to money, I really used to feel like I have two left hands. Maybe I have only 1.5 left hands now. But while I was in the Wharton School, I kept thinking to myself, what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this? Am I really cut out for this? What am I doing here? Imposters. Imposters. So I was at Penn for 6 years. I came up for tenure and didn't get it. Now it didn't give me imposter syndrome because I really didn't belong at the Wharton School. I wasn't very productive. I didn't have enough papers, and it just wasn't, on a certain level, or at least in retrospect, it wasn't a surprise that I didn't get tenure. I didn't deserve tenure. So it wasn't exactly imposter syndrome, but I didn't belong there. Okay. The next stop was at the Medical College of Pennsylvania, where I did get an associate professorship, and I was introduced as the new biostatistician. And every time I was introduced that way, I would say, no, statistician, because I didn't know a thing about biostatistics. They didn't know what they were doing when they hired me, but never mind. So since they were calling me a biostatistician, I went to the library and read a paper by Kaplan and Meyer, and any of you who are biostatisticians will laugh, because that is the seminal paper that began to distinguish biostatistics from statistics. It was very lonely at Medical College of Pennsylvania. I really had no colleagues. I was in the department of something like preventive medicine. Some nice people, but they didn't know a thing about what I did. And they couldn't help me do what I wanted to do. It was very lonely. So there was this voice in my head, get me out of here. And I applied for jobs. And what happened was I got a job at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Again, I'm not quite sure why. I gave a seminar on a study I did at Medical College of Pennsylvania, and actually it turned out that my analysis was wrong. True story. Okay, so there I am, back to New York. So Sloan Kettering was a wonderful place, at least initially. I had colleagues, both medical colleagues and statistical colleagues. And actually, one of the first things I learned was that treating cancer is very intense. And of course, I guess it's sort of obvious, but I ran into two types of oncologists there. Those that were very religious and went to church or synagogue every week, and those that cursed like hell. And the two classes were not disjoint. So I met a fellow who's from China, and he thought the F word was an ordinary adjective, and I actually told him that it wasn't a nice word, and he should use it all the time. He had this oncologist who went to synagogue every week and who cursed like hell, as his mentor, and so he thought that was an ordinary adjective. So at Sloan Kettering, I really learned a lot about data analysis and clinical trials. I read clinical trials books and papers, and again, not only did I read the Kaplan-Meier paper, I learned to make Kaplan-Meier plots. But seriously, I learned a lot about data analysis and clinical trials, and I was very happy there for 10 years. Even though I was commuting from New Jersey, which was a terrible train ride every day. So one day I got this phone call, and I believe the person who made the call is watching now. She's shaking her head. And she told me about this job as director of the Biostatistics Research branch at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. And she said I ought to apply for it, and I couldn't imagine why, but okay, so I applied for it. And I was called to interview, and the interview was by a committee. This is all branch chiefs and higher positions are interviewed by a committee. And so, and at that time it was in person. So we're sitting around a table, and these people I don't know are asking all these questions. How do you handle interpersonal relationships? Well, I knocked two heads together. No, I mean, it was really very ominous. And then I had to, as a second interview, I had to meet the NHLBI director, and he was French and known to be very particular, difficult to get along with. And Vince DeVita had moved from the National Cancer Institute to Sloan Kettering. And apparently Vince DeVita had a memorable personality. And one of the questions Claude L'Enfant asked me was how Vince DeVita was getting along at Memorial. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just not privy to that. Everybody knew he was a miserable character. So I got the job. There we are. There's the trajectory. New York, Cleveland, Rochester, Philadelphia, New York, and Bethesda. Oh boy, there it is again. It was a great opportunity. And Herb and I decided I should take this job because he could find a job within a couple of years. And we were wrong. He didn't find a job within a couple of years. And so the commute began. And for 10 years, I took the train on weekends, or sometimes he came to Washington, and commuted between New Jersey and Washington. My immediate supervisor knew and told me not to mention it to Claude, because at that time, telework was unheard of. And I was supposed to be there 5 days a week. So I'd show up Monday at about 10, getting up very early in the morning to get there, and leave at about 2 on Friday. And the one time Claude called me to a meeting on Friday afternoon, my boss, who is to this day a friend, said, "Don't worry, I'll cover for you." So, and then after 10 years, Herb did get a job at NHLBI. I have a comment about moving from MSC, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, to NHLBI. And it meant changing disease focus, and that's non-trivial. It's kind of starting over. On the other hand, it was the opportunity to lead a group, and I wanted that. I didn't have imposter syndrome about that. And when you lead a group, other opportunities follow. So in 2009, I got a phone call from somebody I didn't know. He happens to be head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics now, to ask me to run for president of the American Statistical Association. And I said, and I quote, "Are you sure you're calling the right person?" Because I wasn't that particularly active in ASA. I was on the committee for women in statistics, but not, and the caucus and the committee are different, as you know. And I didn't think I was involved enough in the organization to be asked to run for president. But the story is that the way ASA presidencies work is that there's a rotation between government, academia, and industry. So it's 1, 2, 3, and they probably just didn't have anybody else to ask to run. At the same time, in the, going on in my head was the honor. Oh my God, the honor. So I agreed to run. And you know what happens if you run for office? You might actually win. And I did. And an interesting sidebar is that the person I was running against, whose name I don't even remember, there were pictures, there were photos in Amstat News of the candidates, and write-ups. And this guy had a scowl on his face. And my brother-in-law looked at the picture and said, "Oh my God, he looks like a con." And there actually was once an article about who wins elections, and the smiling face always wins. Okay, so I ran because I smiled. I won because I smiled. So this is an example of the opportunities that arise when you're president of ASA. The photo on the left shows Mitch Gale, Julie Popper Schaefer, me, Sir David Cox, and Lynn Billard. So this was at when I gave this was in 2011 when I gave the president, I became president and had a presidential invited speaker and had invited Sir David, whom I happened to have met at a small meeting once upon a time. And he accepted my invitation. And so I got to hang out with Sir David. The picture on the right is me and C.R. Rao. This was at a meeting in Sri Lanka. As president of ASA, I got to go to Sri Lanka as an invited speaker. And the other invited speaker was C.R. Rao. And I always said, "Oh, there are 2 invited speakers at this meeting. Yeah, C.R. Rao and Jane Doe." That was not imposter syndrome. That was real. C.R. Rao and his family were very, very lovely. We hung out. There are a lot of photos of all of us. The opportunity to meet very famous statisticians. I don't know, maybe I'm just a statistical groupie, but it was a wonderful experience. Okay, so one of my conclusions about this whole story, and I had this talk has been given in other versions in the past, and I put in the slide, what is the secret to success? And last night, I found myself writing, am I really successful? And I think there's this little thing that I still have imposter syndrome. It rears its ugly head at regular intervals. And basically, you just have to overcome imposter syndrome. You have to have the yes, I can attitude. And it's really helpful to have resilience. And if there's anybody on for whom English is not their first language, resilience means the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful again after setbacks. So not everyone is cut out to be an academic. I enjoyed the teaching, and actually flubbed on the research, which later became a very serious part of my life. But there are many opportunities outside academia. And for each of you, you should consider the balance between research and other things you have to do on a job, like teaching or consulting, hopefully collaboration. I guess another take home is don't be afraid to relocate. And that's because not everybody goes directly down one path. The first time I gave this talk, I was preceded by a woman who had got her degree at Harvard, did a postdoc, didn't do a postdoc, got an assistant professorship at Chapel Hill, married one of her colleagues, got tenure, became a full professor. That was her story. That was her entire story. And I'm sitting there saying, oh God, is my story different? Okay, so for many, the first job won't be your last, and that's life. And there's always a conflict between the personal and the professional. People have partners, and you are compromising with your partner all the time. So I also recommend that you develop flexibility. Some of us may be born with it. And yet you can't be afraid to try something new. You have to have a yes, I can attitude, even if you have imposter syndrome. And it's nice to be able to have opportunities and take advantage of them when they arrive, and don't be afraid of new challenges. So I have one more slide because this talk is so personal. I thought it